Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending upon where you are watching today. And welcome to the second event of this three-part series on Dorothy Day and the Benedictines. I'm David Mueller, the coordinator of the Dorothy Day Canonization Prayer Network. I'm also the education program coordinator of Casa Esther Catholic Worker House, from which we are broadcasting today. Last week, Anne Clement detailed all the Benedictine influences on Dorothy Day's spirituality, her prayer life and theology, and included the personal relationships she had with significant Benedictines. Through Anne's presentation, we discovered the mutuality of charisms between the Catholic worker movement and the Benedictines, like prayer, work, hospitality, and the practice of the spiritual and corporal works of mercy. Today, we are going to hear from three individuals who are attracted to both Catholic worker movement and the Benedictine way of life. We will see how they integrated both aspects into their life and what attracted each of them. It is too simple to say that they wanted to imitate Dorothy Day by moving in both of these directions. They were inspired by her, but rather it is more accurate to say that in their desire to imitate Christ, they were drawn to the Catholic worker movement and drawn to become professed Benedictine Oblates. The majority of our audience today are Benedictine Oblates, but for those of you who are not, here is a short definition that will help you better understand today's discussion. A Benedictine Oblate seeks God in their chosen way of life. They offer themselves, the word oblate meaning offering, to God in service of others. Through their prayer, service, and community, they witness to Christ's presence in today's world. A Benedictine Oblate seeks God in association with a monastic community. As you listen to today's panel discussion and hear how our three panelists have incorporated and gotten involved with the Catholic worker movement, you'll have a better understanding of the Catholic worker movement if you don't have a good understanding at this point. As you listen to our panelists, let your curiosity get the best of you, and as you think of questions you would like to ask, type your question into the chat. You can also type comments into the chat, but we ask that your comments are related to today's topic. For those of you who want to learn more about the Dorothy Day Canonization Prayer Network, at the end of the Q&A and following my remarks about next week, I will spend 2 minutes talking about it. And now, let's move into our discussion. Our moderator today is Jeff Riegel del Corrigan. Jeff served as the coordinator of Cardinal Dolan's inquiry into the life and virtues of Dorothy Day, servant of God, for 7 years. He currently works as a church consultant for coaching, planning, and evaluation with Corrigan Associates. He is the author of several books about Catholic social ministry, including the forthcoming graphic biography, Dorothy Day, Radical Devotion. Jeff, welcome.
Thanks, David. And so great to see so many friends, old and new. We've got over 50 people on the line. And we're going to have a great discussion about Benedictine Oblates and the Catholic worker, how some Benedictine Oblates operate in both worlds, and how they integrate it, and how they've been inspired by Dorothy Day, servant of God, who was a Benedictine Oblate, in addition to being the founder of the Catholic worker movement. So let's start with just an introduction of our panelists. First, we've got Rosalie Riegel, who's from Evanston, Illinois, and is still active in the larger Catholic worker movement, although she hasn't lived in a house of hospitality since leaving the Janine Collier Catholic worker in Saginaw, Michigan in 2004. And she's an oblate at St. Scholastica Monastery in Chicago and a member of Pope John XXIII Parish, where she attends St. Nicholas Church and is active in their Peace and Justice Committee. She's the mother of 4 daughters and the grandmother of 7. An oral historian, she's professor emerita in English from Saginaw Valley State University. Our second panelist is Dr. Carmina Chapp, who's also an educator and a speaker who has been involved in Catholic ministry for over 25 years. Her journey includes university teaching and administration, seminary formation, online education, and Catholic homeschooling. And having introduced her students to the vision of Dorothy Day and Peter Morin to create a new society within the shell of the old, for her entire career, she and her husband founded the Dorothy Day Catholic Worker Farm in the spring of 2013 in Pennsylvania, and have made their final Benedictine oblation in September of 2017, inspired by Dorothy Day. And the panelist who has been a Benedictine oblate for the longest time is Liza Apper, who joined the Catholic Worker Movement in 1970, over 50 years ago. She made a profession as a Benedictine oblate of St. Andrew's Abbey in Vallejo, California in 1978. In 1997, Liza and her husband Brian founded the St. Benedict Catholic Worker in Fresno, California. Liza holds a bachelor's degree in theology from Creighton University, and she's got her school spirit on today, and a master's degree in pastoral ministry from Loyola, New Orleans. Liza currently practices as a pastoral counselor specializing in grief counseling at the St. Benedict Catholic Worker. She also helps distribute food, hold Friday night vespers, and engages in additional practices in the corporal and spiritual works of mercy. So thanks y'all for being here today. And so I'd like to start with Liza. Over 50 years as a Catholic worker, you must know something about this. And being a Benedictine oblate for almost the same amount of time. How and why did you become a Benedictine oblate? And what monastery are you professed to and why?
I inquired as an oblate in 1977, but I actually was introduced to the monastery, St. Andrew's. It was a priory then, now it's an abbey, in 1969 through my high school. And we would visit, they used to have an art festival every year, and we would go and help out with that. And I was intrigued by it, mainly because my spiritual life, which was always very deep and long inside me, I can remember from being 6 years old to having this deeply personal relationship with God. And it just grew and really intensified in high school. I was thinking about joining a religious community. I like to think that Dorothy had that same calling, which intrigued me later, of the Catholic worker. What drew me mostly to the Benedictine way of life was that it was a way of life. It was a spiritual way of life. It was a way in which I could increase my relationship with God, but also to carry it out into the world as best I could. That's basically what it is. It was all about relationship, and my relationship to God, and who I was before God, and then who I am with others. That's basically it. I always think, when I think about Dorothy, I think of that Song of Songs, which says, on my bed at night, I sought the man who was my sweetheart. I sought him and could not find him. So I shall get up and go through the city, in the streets and in the squares. I shall seek my sweetheart. I sought but could not find him. I came upon the watchmen, those who go on their rounds in the city. Have you seen my sweetheart? Barely had I passed them when I found my sweetheart. I caught him and would not let him go.
Beautiful, beautiful. Carmina, how and why did you become a Benedictine oblate? Let's hear from you, and what monastery you profess to, and why did you choose that monastery?
The monastery we joined is the Transfiguration Monastery in Windsor. And one of the founding sisters of the monastery is Sister Donald Corcoran, who of course is on the Guild Committee, and knew Dorothy, lived with her for a year. So we've had many wonderful conversations, not just about Dorothy, but about theology. She's a very educated woman. My husband and I are both have doctorates in theology, and have been teaching theology for, seems like, a million years now. So the academic side of Sister Donald was wonderful to connect with. and to connect all the theology that we've been learning and teaching all these years to kind of bring it into action and bring it into our daily lives. So it's actually the closest one to us as well. That's one of the reasons too. It's geographically only an hour and a half from us, but providentially, it was also the monastery Sister Donald was at. So that's why we chose that one. Now for myself, the Benedictine spirituality, I was introduced to Dorothy. I'm I feel kind of nervous sometimes around a lot of the Catholic workers in these audiences, because I didn't know Dorothy when she was alive. I didn't even know she existed until after she had died. I was introduced to her in college. We read The Long Loneliness in a Catholic social teaching class, and I had just come back from Rome, a semester in Rome. I was at the University of Notre Dame, and I'd studied abroad. And I been amazed at this church that I belong to, and just fell in love with Jesus, fell in love with my faith. And I came back just wanting to learn more and more and more about it. Took this Catholic social teaching class, learned about Dorothy. And when I'd come back, I kept thinking to myself, how am I going to live this faith in the United States of America? Because it's just such a consumeristic, materialistic culture. And I just didn't want any of that anymore. I just wanted to give my life to Christ. And I said, how do you do this in this country, this culture? And I read The Long Loneliness, and I'm like, oh, there you go. That's how you do it. Dorothy Day did it. So from that moment, I was just a huge fan of her, and I would read her writings, and just the way she just lived the gospel and didn't care about the consequences governmentally or societally or church government, anything. She didn't care. She just had to do what Jesus wanted her to do. And so I tried to live my life like that. And I was always admiring her. And so whenever I had a chance in a class to teach, I always made sure we read something by her. Every student of mine has always read something by Dorothy Day. So fast forward, my husband retires. I'm still working. I'm teaching in the online program at the time. And we get in prayer, we discern and prayerfully, we should do this farm and become Catholic workers. It was kind of about time, after my love for Dorothy, to be part of her movement. So we started the farm, and it's more of the agricultural university side of the worker movement. But in doing that, then we were already praying the Liturgy of the Hours, which is a huge part of being an oblate. And coming to the farm, we found ourselves just inviting people to the farm all the time. And this hospitality that we were given to express here was all part of it too. And then the simplicity of life. So when I learned that Dorothy was also an oblate, I said, this is perfect. We're already doing this. We should just make it official. And then when the monastery so close to us had Sister Donald at it, it just all clicked. So that's kind of how I became a Benedictine Oblate. It was through becoming a Catholic worker first, but it was originally as a young woman being inspired by Dorothy Day to be able to live this faith in our culture.
Just a quick follow-up, because many of our attendees probably aren't familiar with that term, agronomic university. It sounds like Texas A&M almost. So tell us a little bit. I mean, you're a university person, and then you're kind of start this farm and call it an agronomic university. What's the connection there?
Well, I think it's the teaching is the connection. Peter Marin had this vision of farms being places where people would learn all these homesteading skills, the skills that were all being lost to corporate industrial farming and big corporations. And people didn't know where their food came from. People thought their food came from a supermarket. They didn't know that milk actually came out of an animal. In fact, I've had people visiting, I'd offer them fresh goat milk out of the goat, and they wouldn't take it because they didn't trust it unless it came from a plastic bottle. So we teach people here. It is really funny. We're farmers, we farm. And it's funny because when we first came here, we thought, oh, we're here to feed the poor. But we're not really that great at farming. We make a lot of mistakes, and we don't have a huge place, so we don't make an abundance of food. But what we do grow, we give away, because we couldn't eat all of it anyway, but we do give it all away. But really the bigger part of the mission turned out to be inviting people to participate in the farming. So come and help us plant the plants, come and help us weed, come and help us harvest and bring it to wherever we're going to bring it to. And in doing that, in people getting an experience of the soil, it changes them. It gives them a connection with God and how he intended things to be. So the agronomic university is really meant to do that. It's meant to give people exposure to farm life that they haven't had ever in many ways. And that was Peter's vision. He said, we have to get back to the land. He was a back to the lander way before it was cool. He said, this is the answer to our industrialized problems, that we need to get back to the soil and back to the way God does things, get back to nature. So we do farming, but we mostly teach. The biggest thing I do in teaching is with spinning wool. We have sheep and we shear them. We process the wool and spin it into yarn. And that's really fun. There are a lot of young people are really excited about learning that skill.
Thanks, Carmina. Let's hear from Rosalie, who's also an academic, a retired academic, who's written a book that of oral histories of Dorothy Day, portraits by those who knew her. That's a fantastic book. If anyone wants to kind of get into the life of Dorothy Day through the eyes of people that knew her. So Rosalie, tell us a little bit about how you became a Benedictine Oblate and what monastery you professed with and why.
Well, I became a Catholic worker sort of late in my life, and I became a Benedictine Oblate even later. I'm kind of a newbie as an Oblate. I was professed in 2015. I had a Catholic worker house in Saginaw, Michigan. I say I wrote myself into the Catholic worker, first with Voices from the Catholic Worker, where I interviewed a bunch of Catholic workers at that time in the 80s, published in 93, and then the Dorothy book. And then after I retired, 2 books on nonviolent resistors, most of them whom were Catholic workers. But after in 2004, I'd had life-changing experiences living in a Catholic worker house, helping women and their children who were in need of solace and direction and support. But I realized that my own family needed me in Chicago. So I left the Janine Collier house and went to Chicago. And when I came to Chicago, I realized I became active in Catholic worker communities in Chicago, but I wasn't living there. I needed a structure in my life. I went to a couple of retreats looking, one at St. Walburga's in Colorado, one at the Ecumenical Community in Madison, Wisconsin, and one in Gethsemane. But I realized I needed somebody close. Oh, I found one. The Benedictines, Scholastica's, St. Scholastica, the Benedictine Sisters of Chicago, are just 1.5 miles down the road from me. And so I went there. I was just so happy to find that they had a very active oblate group, and many of them have become my friends. I joined the oblates, went to the bishop and joined in 2015. Because I felt I needed some depth to my life now that I was no longer living in a Catholic worker house. I do have a Christ room. I've had some very interesting guests living with me. Got into some trouble with my apartment house because they have pretty strict rules about it. But I've hosted women who needed a place to stay, a mother and her child who were undocumented from Colombia, and several interesting people. So I do have a Christ room, but I'm not living in community like I did for so many years, at first with a family and then in community. So the Benedictines, particularly with Sister Benita Coffey, she's just a marvelous oblate director and very outgoing. And so we have a basis for our involvement in the community, working with immigrants. My parish is very active in that as well, and working with those that need our help. And also being fairly active. I'm still quite active in protesting war, although not quite as much as I used to be. But being a Benedictine has been, it's been very good for me because it gives a structure to my life, and it connects me with so many wonderful other Catholic worker Benedictines. I've got to mention a couple that could very well have been on this panel. Brian Terrell and Betsy Keenan from Malloy, Iowa. Brian has written a lot about Benedictines, including a really good article in the Catholic Worker newspaper in the early 90s. And Tina Cipolla, who I believe is on this course, on this panel audience. And Addie Bethune was an original oblate. So there have always been oblate connections. And I think when you, as Anne showed, the connections that the background that Dorothy learned from Peter, and then from associating with Monsignor Riegel and the abbots or the monks at St. Procopius, that deepened her spirituality as well. And I dare to say that she has perhaps broadened the Benedictine idea to be more outgoing, more reaching out, particularly in the oblate group, as we move in the world.
Yeah,
I have a follow-up question for all three of you around that structure and order. Catholic Worker is a very decentralized organization, sometimes chaotic. People have even described it as anarchist. How do you put all that together? You know, like, how do you integrate being a Benedictine Oblate with being a Catholic worker? And how do you make sense of that idea? I mean, the Benedictines have a rule, and Catholic workers often embrace anarchism. So help me understand, and help our participants understand that. And anybody, you know, we can be more conversational now.
Well, I guess I'll dive in here. Yeah, you're correct in saying Catholic workers don't appreciate the letter of anybody's law. That's a given. But it's the spirit in which, the spirit of Benedictine spirituality that draws Catholic workers, at least for me. I remember going to the monastery and being enamored with the prayer and the rhythm and the structure, and the fact that Thomas Merton said this, I think, to Dorothy Day, that he went to Gethsemane because he was so intrigued that people had to give up everything. And Catholic worker life is like that. But I think in along with that spirit of what it means to be a Catholic worker and a Benedictine, early on in our Catholic worker, we're the only Catholic worker that served on the porch of a Fresno County jail. And by the way, Dorothy's last arrest was in our city, in Fresno, California, in 1973 for the United Farm Workers. And she spent 3 weeks in Fresno County Jail. Dorothy was always in terms of embracing Benedictine spirituality, she talked about the mystical body of Christ and that we are all one. And we like to think as Catholic workers, we are embracing all, but we're really not. In a lot of ways, we know who our people are. We serve those in need, usually the poor. But there are many definitions of those who are in need, and the corporal and spiritual works of mercy, which is the mission of the Catholic worker, and also Benedictine life, has no economic strata except the fact that people are in need of solace, of food, a quilt, everything. And that was never brought more powerfully to us than our witness at the jail, serving people getting out of jail and people visiting. And because when we decided to do that work in front of the jail, we knew who our people were we were serving. We were serving the families visiting at the jail and the people released from jail, never thinking that a lawyer or a sheriff's officer or any of those people were in need. Well, God kind of smacked us up inside our head. And one night there was a sheriff's lieutenant who came out and asked us, he had been talking about why we were doing this and was kind of intrigued. And then he said, you know, ma'am, he said, would you follow me? And I thought, oh my God, something, because we had had a rocky start at the jail. And so I followed him and he went to his car and he had a 25-pound bag of pinto beans and a 20-pound bag of rice. And he said, could you use this in your soup, ma'am? Oh my God. I was like, okay. And the lieutenant is the watch commander of the whole jail. So it wasn't just an officer. Well, several months later, he tried to take his life. And we came to his aid and really realized, you know, in those encounters with him and the care that we took with him, that we're all members of the body of Christ, that it's nobody's excluded, nobody's left out. And this sheriff's lieutenant who made over 100,000 a year was in just as much kind of need as anybody, even more so on our soup line. So it really brought to us the consciousness of Benedictine spirituality and Catholic worker spirituality and the work and how it is interwoven into the fact that we are all members of the body of Christ, called to do the corporal and spiritual works of mercy to whoever crosses our path. So, you know, there's no regulation or rule, but there's the spirit of Benedictine spirituality, which is inculcated in Catholic worker. And for that, we are deeply grateful. And it changed the course of our Catholic worker. We now saw not just those who are poor, but those who are in need, whatever that may be, and however that may be. And yeah.
I remember being so impressed when I learned that Liza was ministering also to the sometimes very conflicted men who were guarding the prisoners and working sometimes when they didn't like it, but it was the only job they could get. But I, you know, I wasn't an oblate when I was a Catholic, when I was living as a Catholic worker. And so I don't have too much to contribute here, except to say that when I listened to Anne's talk last week, I realized that I had been prepared by my education at St. Mary's about the liturgical movement, which was in the 50s and 60s, pre-Vatican II actually, was urging us to get out on the streets, to unite our feeling of the mystical body with the people of Christ that we saw on the streets. So even though it took a while for this to percolate in me and to come out into something, it was very important for me.
How about you, Carmina? You know, this whole idea of kind of the chaos of helping people in need versus the rule of Saint Benedict. How do you put that all together?
I think I need to. I don't think I could do the constant work of being Christ to the person in front of you or treating them as Christ in front of you unless I was grounded in something really solid, which is the rule. So to say, okay, I have to pray my prayers every day. I have to pray my morning prayer, I pray at daytime, and we pray evening prayer. And I may miss sometimes because I'm not at a monastery where the bell rings and everyone comes. When I'm on the farm, we gather because we have a little chapel here. But if I'm not at the farm, if I'm somewhere else, I know, okay, what I'm doing is because I am a child of God and have to do this. There's a reason behind what I'm doing when I'm serving people, and that reason is Christ. So the rule really grounds me to make sure that my work doesn't become just self-satisfying. Like, oh, look at me, I'm so great, I'm serving people. It keeps me humble. Chapter 7 of the rule is like, I have to read that over and over and over again, because the humility. So I think you need the rule. I need the rule. I won't speak for everybody. I need the rule so that I can continue to do what I have to do. And it also gives me the courage, because there is an anarchist element to it when you're doing something for Christ that pushes against what everyone thinks you ought to be doing. Yeah. And I think this is where the rule comes in, is so important for me. I have to treat that person as Christ, even if you think I'm being too easy.
I think too that the rule reminds me that to live out the Catholic worker feeling of being separate from the world, of not listening to everything that comes bombarded at you, to live materialistically and to buy and all of that stuff.
But it gives me the courage to go against the flow.
Grounded in that. But when I wrote the book Voices from the Catholic Worker, there was a lot of chaos in the Catholic worker. I've got and actually, I think the Catholic worker now, whether it's because of Benedictines or it's just the changes in society, the Catholic worker isn't as chaotic as it used to be. St. Francis House used to, in Chicago on Kenmore, used to have people lying all over on the floor all the time, as did the Open Door community when it was cold in Atlanta. And now the Catholic worker on Kenmore Street in Chicago is beautiful, much better organized. They even had a little list of what to do in the kitchen, which they didn't ever used to have. So we used to say it was chaos and cockroaches. Now I think which is kind of a better.
That sounds very attractive, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Oblates, one of the purposes of the Oblates, it used to be in the Middle Ages, how they got to be was that families in the Middle Ages would commit 1 or 2 of their children to live at the monastery. And they would serve. And some states, some didn't. At our monastery, we had Brother Dominic, who came as a child, and he did stay. But the Oblates worked at the monastery, and they wanted to have a stronger spiritual life. And the spiritual practices and how monks saw the world. And the Benedictine vision of being on the margins, as Rosalie so wonderfully said, of not being, of eschewing materialism and the world's values. Benedictines refused to be seduced by the things that society had to offer, but they had a commitment to witness. And that's really why, it intrigued me. What the disciplines in the Benedictine rule help bring about is a clarity of vision. And we, as Benedictine Oblates, we are in relationship with God as well as, the Catholic worker. What drew me to the monastery, what drew me to the Catholic worker, what drew Merton to Yosemite is to leave it all for Christ. I mean, I used to go to upstate New York as a child and go to Orisville and be intrigued by the Jesuits who gave it all up. And I was like, oh, that's what I want to do. But it's all about that relationship to God, who God is, who you are before God, and then your relationship with others, bringing it out into the world. And I think that really is the essence of Benedictine life, and how the disciplines, as Carmina was saying, the disciplines help structure us. They give us a framework, but they also help define and nurture our relationship with God, which we could not continue. I could not continue this work without that relationship. I couldn't. It would just be impossible. It would be, as Carmina would say, doing good.
We've mentioned the rule several times, but what are some Benedict, or what's been the most important Benedictine author, writer, speaker, teacher that's influenced you outside of the rule?
Well, for me, I'm going to go first. It's Norvine Vest. She was our oblate director of St. Andrews. She is a Benedictine Oblate. She's Episcopalian theologian. And now she has actually switched monasteries to a female monastery because she moved to Virginia. And she's written 6 books on Benedictine spirituality and the common life. And what I like about her is she inculcates Benedictine spirituality with real life, not that it's some esoteric practice. And one of the things I use as an oblate novice director is her workbook called Preferring Christ. And it's actually a workbook that has all the rule in it, page by page, a reflection, and then a response in prayer and in journaling. And it really helps structure the rule in your life. Like the first thing, one of the monks at the abbey told me, the most important word in the rule is the first, listen. Listen. If we can listen to what is going on with our hearts and God, our relationship with God, with ourselves, and who we are before God and with others, that is a jumping off point to being able to be Christ in the world. And she has, in her latest book, it's really very good. It's called Speaking the Truth to Power. And it talks about the Benedictine charism of speaking the truth to power by uniting with the suffering of the world and developing, developing that compassion, which Brueggemann says is the first thing that disappears in the empire. So when we talk about what value Benedictine life can give in conjunction with Catholic worker life, we talk about that compassion.
Liza, we've got a request for you to type the spelling of the name in the chat. Maybe while you're doing that, we can hear from Carmina and Rosalie. Who's a Benedictine thinker that's influenced you?
Well, first and foremost, it's been Sister Joan Chittister. We're almost exactly the same age, but she's probably a lot more active than I am. When I was going through my novitiate to be an oblate, I read her commentary on the rule, and I still read it every day, and I read everything she has written. And I've even had the chance to meet her a couple times. She came to I think it was our 60th college reunion, and we were able to have some time alone together, and that was really fun. But there are lots of other great people who write on Benedictine. One is Judith Valente, who's on this Zoom today. She's a wonderful writer about Benedictine spirituality. Another one is Sister Irene Noel, I think. I don't remember how to spell her name. Yeah. One of her books was about the Psalms, and it got me a lot more used to the Psalms that are angry and so that's really good. And I just want to point out that lots of Benedictine houses, or several Benedictine or Catholic worker houses, still say Compline. We never did at our house because we had, unfortunately, some members of the community who'd been very harmed by Christianity. So we were more ecumenical in our approach. But I think that prayer in the Catholic worker house is really important, and often it has elements of Benedictine spirituality in it.
Carmina, how about you?
Well, mine were, I guess it was more academic than personal spirituality. Odo Cassell, Dom Odo Cassell.
Mhm.
and Virgil Michael, the Benedictine from St. John's Abbey, and their work on the liturgical movement. That was really my area of study in graduate school, and it's really I'm interested in liturgy and sacraments, and the connection between, especially with Virgil Michael, the connection of what we do in liturgy affects what we do outside of liturgy, and his desire to make that connection, to not separate liturgy from social action or social justice. And Dorothy was all into that. So I think she appreciated things about him the same thing that I did. And I knew him before I knew her. I knew about him. And Odo Cassell, reading his Mystery of Christian Worship is just heaven to me. And when I started studying more closely Sacrosancta Concilium in Vatican II, I could see Odo Cassell's influence of that document, and the desire to make people more aware of what's happening in liturgy, and that we're making a sacrifice of ourselves to God at Mass. And that means something. We are responsible now when we leave to go out and bring Christ out into the world, but to really make these reforms of the liturgy such that people know what's going on and are affected by it. So I love that. I love that about both of those Benedictines, because part of the Benedictine tradition is academics. Benedictines have like the colleges and the libraries. I know Sister Donald she has this wonderful library at her monastery, and she's always reading and always keeping educated. And I love that about it, that we never kind of stand still in any particular school of thought. We keep reading and we keep exploring and trying to grow closer and closer to God. So those are the two that I have been most influenced by, is Dom Odo Cassell and Virgil Michael.
Now the
I
balance
want to say
between
one more thing, and that's that our oblate group does a book study every year. And this year we're studying a pretty challenging book by Patrick Henry that's kind of answering Ron Derer's book that said Benedictine option was to withdraw from the world. And he's saying, no, it's exactly the opposite. Benedictines are in the world. They're of the world. They care about the world. They see Christ in everyone. And so we're studying that book this year.
Yeah, that's great.
Book every year.
Thank you, Rosalie. Just a final question before we get into the participants' questions. There's been a bit of talk about balancing kind of the contemplative side of faith and the action. And I really get the feeling that action in the world is not a problem for y'all. Like, you're out doing a lot of stuff, and even apologizing for not doing more when you're actually doing tons of stuff. So the question I have is, how do you make sure that you have that contemplative side, that doesn't get kind of swallowed up in all the activity? And I imagine that's a challenge for many Catholic workers.
I can jump in on that, because it is something I've really had to think about and practice to try to get it right. Not that I have, but my inspiration there actually is Catherine of Siena. Because Catherine of Siena, when she was younger, was really confined to her house. She wanted that. She wanted to be alone in her little room with Jesus. And then one day Jesus kicks her out of her house and says, go out into the world. And she always kept within her little cell inside of her. So she was always alone with Jesus, even when she was in the world. So she was able to kind of bring those two together. So I would try to practice that consciously when I'm in a meeting or when I'm in a conversation with someone, and I know this is an important conversation, I need to be on my game. I always go back to that. I'm like, okay, Christ is with me here. Be with me here, and open my mouth the way you want me to speak, or shut my mouth up if I'm going to say something wrong. But I become very conscious of that contemplative part of me has to be with me when I go to action, lest I just do it for my own pride. So again, you can't separate the world from anarchy. You can't really separate contemplative from action. otherwise the action can have the wrong meaning, like you could have the wrong motivation. And if you're just contemplative, it can be escapism if there's not action involved in it. So even cloistered nuns and abbot priors and all, if they're very active in praying for things of the world, they have to be aware of what's going on. They can't escape the world just because they're behind these locked doors. So I think you really need to integrate both contemplative and action together, because if you separate them, I don't know how you do that without just going crazy. I don't know. So that's my thought.
Right. We have a question from maybe either for Liza or Rosalie. What's the state of the Catholic worker movement nowadays? This is a question from one of our participants. Is it growing? Is it stable? Are young people involved? How would you describe that?
Well, I think that's a wonderful question. The answer is probably going to be quite subjective. I just returned 2 weeks ago from a Catholic Worker National Gathering, and there were a lot of young people involved. In fact, they had a special caucus, and there was a whole lot of people. They caucused as young people. We didn't get a report from it, but I'm sure we will from later. I checked just today, and there are 187 communities registered on the CatholicWorker.org website, which is never accurate because people come and go and people say they're Catholic workers and don't really say much about it. But Jerry, who's the new coordinator of that website, says he thinks it's closer to 200. But it's, I think Dorothy Day always said, keep it small, keep it small. So the influence of the individual workers and their individual communities is what's important. And as Liza and Carmina both pointed out, all the Catholic workers are different. So they're responding to the problems of that particular community. And even though we try to live the Benedictine rule, we are, the Benedictine rule, as Patrick Henry says, is different traditions, growing traditions, changing traditions. So like we're going to get a house of hospitality just next door to our apartment house in Evanston. And that's a big change for an Evanston nice kind of community. So that's, you know, it's taking a while, but it's going to work. I'm sure it is. And we'll be moving on.
I think that Catholic workers are struggling, just like everyone else these past 3 years with the COVID and reassessment, with aging in the Catholic worker, with illnesses, with all kinds of things. And that's why the Benedictine rule is so important for Catholic workers, because that first word, listen. How do we listen to the call of God? Ever changing, ever evolving. I never thought in a million years I'd go back to school and become a pastoral counselor specializing in grief. Not really what Catholic workers do, to go back to school, but it has changed our community. It has given life to people who had no hope, who have losses. And we're in an age now where people have suffered a lot of loss, you know, whether it was illness or whatever. People are floundering, and Catholic workers are. We're asking ourselves, and the question, you know, where do we go from here? Where does God want us to go? And in developing that prayer life, in listening, and in talking with one another, good things will come. And I think that's why the Catholic worker for me is a magical spiritual experience, because we're not static. We're not stuck in ourselves and saying, you know what, this worked for us. A soup line from the jail worked for us 5 years ago. It's not who we are today, because we have different experiences as a worker house. We have different experiences as a person aging in the Catholic worker. So how do we bring about, just like monasteries, how do we bring about that city of God? how do we bring about that vision of Christ in the mystical body and witnessing to that right now with what we're going through and with what we're listening to as God's call. And I think that makes it exciting. I mean, it's hard to give up things that you used to do. It's hard to reimagine, or as I tell people, we don't retire in the Catholic worker, we refire. And it's important to, to listen to God. How does God want us to refire? What does he want us to do? And I think there's a lot of good conversation among Catholic workers now as to more dedication to the spiritual life, because a lot of us in training at the Catholic worker didn't cut our teeth on spirituality. It was do, mission. And a lot of us know who are older and in that contemplative state of mind in a lot of ways, we say, but wait a minute, we can't do unless we have something, as Dan Berrigan would say, older and better than America to believe it. And so I think it's exciting. And I think the young people are attracted to it. And my daughter recently died of cancer, and we were invited by she was in the Midwest, and the Indianapolis Catholic worker, the House of the Low Flower, put us up for 5 months while she was in treatment. And we were an intergenerational house, 420 somethings, my daughter and I. And it was a new house in the sense that the staff had all turned over. But it was beautiful to see, and here's the wisdom of Benedict, beautiful to see integrated households where the older ones are respected and valued, and the younger ones are respected and valued for who they are. And it just was beautiful, a beautiful experiment that we still are connected to today. But yeah, lots of exciting news coming from listening.
And speaking of listening, the church is engaging in an unprecedented listening process called the Synod on Synodality. And I wondered, have any of you all, this is a question from the group as well, have any of you all been engaged in that in any way?
I have, but not to a very significant extent, not as a Catholic worker and not as a Benedictine, more as a parishioner.
We had a question about Vatican II that is broad. How has Vatican II been helpful as a Catholic worker and a Benedictine? And I'm curious for you all as Catholic workers and as Benedictines, can you reach back, to Vatican II or to things that are present in the church now that came about because of Vatican II and see any usefulness in that?
I think my image of Vatican II is always John the 23rd going into the Vatican and opening the windows and telling everybody, we have to open the windows. We have to. And I think it's very important. The contribution for me of Vatican II was the end of staticness and the beginning of listening to the Spirit. How is God speaking to us, and how does he want us to witness to his love in the world? And I think the openness, the sense of the opening of the windows and letting the Spirit blow in and be able to act upon that, I think was the gift of Vatican II for me.
Well, and of course, involving the laity, the Catholic workers and the Benedictine Oblates to be more, to be heard more. And I think that's, I mean, I remember the early years of Vatican II were just really lovely, but kind of crazy. We were having all sorts of home masses and everything. And I think one of the things that saddens me is to see in the church people who would just as soon go back to a pre-Vatican thing. And most of them don't remember that. They're younger. They're young priests running around Upper Michigan in cassocks. who were trained in conservative seminaries, but they didn't remember what it was like. And I do, and I'm so glad that we had Vatican II. And we have named we have a merging parish, and we've named it Pope John the 23rd.
Wonderful. And Carmina, we have a question for you from Barbara. Where is the farm, and how do people come and participate for a period of time?
There, it's in northeastern Pennsylvania, in a town called Harvey's Lake, which is not far from Wilkes-Barre, near Scranton, Wilkes-Barre. And we have a website, and I guess we can post the website if you want, Jeff. It's DorothyDayCWFarm.org. And you can just contact us and we'll try to figure out when you can come visit.
Okay, it's DorothyDayCWFarm.org. Okay, I'm just dropping that in the chat if anyone wants to click on that and learn a little bit more about the farm. As we near the end of our time, I want to pivot back to Dorothy Day and just ask you, in that Benedictine spirit, what's the most important thing that you've learned from Dorothy Day?
I'll just go first. Courage.
Say more about that. What do you mean courage? That's a virtue, right? That's one of the cardinal virtues, courage.
I learned from her to not let the voices that would tell you it's not possible to live the gospel to convince you that you can't live the gospel. I just learned that courage from her. She just did it. She didn't care what people thought of her, for better or for worse. Even the praise that she got was like she deflected God. This isn't my work. This is God's work. So it's courage. I just see her as a person, especially like as a young, honest, when I said before, but a young woman in the United States of America, how do I live this gospel in this culture that's really so different from the gospel? And the challenges she was facing are not different from the ones we were facing within the church in America, and that we're very complicit in American culture in our church. We all have suburban parishes that don't look any different from any other thing, right? So she just lived the gospel and did it. And people thought, well, wait, you're making us look bad, basically. But she didn't lord that over people. She just says, you do it too. We can all do it. We're all called to be saints. So that's really what I got from her. We're all called the universal call to holiness, which is in Vatican II, Lumen Gentium, and the courage to do it.
Well, I always say Dorothy Day saved my life. When I was interviewing Kathy St. Clair, she had lived at Tivoli, and she said that. And when she said that to me, I started crying too, because I realized that if it hadn't been for Dorothy Day, I would still be enmeshed in materialism and just a Sunday Catholic probably. What I love most about Dorothy is her whole concept of the quote, unworthy poor. All poor are worthy. And so many times people like to do nice things, but they don't want to get involved with people that do things that disrupt. And Dorothy did, and she wasn't afraid of disrupting either. And she likes this whole message. I think it was, gosh, now I'm blanking on the name. We can work for the little cell of joy and peace. We can throw our pebble in the pond and let the ever widening circle reach wide around the world. In other words, we don't always know what the result of our actions is going to do. Our pebble might make a difference.
Lisa, we're having trouble hearing you.
I did unmute. For me, Dorothy's gift to me was her relationship with God. I remember Robert Ellsberg said he never saw anybody pray as well as Dorothy. And every morning she'd come with her little book of Psalms. Remember when she was at the LA Catholic Worker, and I met her, I was 20, and she came down with her little jar of instant coffee and the book of Psalms. And I knew that this woman was in love with Christ. There was no doubt in my mind. And I thought, there is another person in this universe who is as deeply in love with Christ as I am, and who's pointing a way not only to God for me, but not only who God is, but whose I am, which is God's, and then to bring that into the world. But it was her relationship with God, like in that song Songs, where I looked for my lover and I found him and I would not let him go.
Beautiful. And Liza, we've got another request to put the author of The Name of Preferring Christ in the chat.
Again, that's Norveen Best.
So then why don't we get Carmina and Rosalie on one last question. What do you think about the significance of Dorothy as a canonized saint one day?
Well, I'm excited about it because if she's canonized, she will be read, she will be remembered. She will be, and now, her as a Benedictine Oblat, that's been added to her canonization. I think kind of through the efforts of David Mueller and his Saint a Day website, and other people on the Guild Advisory Board. But I think it's just really important. But I think it needs to be done soon, because when Pope Francis dies, there'll probably be a big backlash, and it'll be harder. So that's why I'm really praying every day, and so are all of our oblats, that she'll be canonized soon.
How about you, Carmina? What do you think of all this?
I think it's terrific that Dorothy's was mentioned by previous popes as well. So it's I don't know that we're so dependent on Francis to get her canonized. I'm more hopeful than that. Pope Benedict mentioned her too in his audiences sometimes. She's an American who's living the gospel. And I think it's important that we have Americans living the gospel. I think it's as simple as that in the modern day, not in the time of when all the immigrants came over from Europe and were setting up all their little churches everywhere, and they were educating people, and that was all great. But I think she's this example of how do you live a Christian life in industrialized Western civilization. So I think we really need her. She is a saint for our times. And I do want it to go quickly. I want it to go right away. I do.
Liza, we're going to give you the last word. Dorothy as a saint, what's the significance for you?
I think, people talked about, Rosalie touched upon the craziness of Vatican II, doing all kinds of things that happened, and I believe as a teacher also that we need examples of saints who are in the flesh. And I think part of the problem post-Vatican II was when Catholic schools were dismantled and they said, well, we're going to have great religious ed programs, and those didn't happen. Our young people don't have a sense of belonging and spirituality. And I think this would be the perfect, segue, you're doing that graphic novel, the perfect segue to that spiritual hunger that young people feel, but we've sort of kind of abandoned that. So I think it's a wonderful thing that Dorothy is going to be a saint, and I love it.
Great way to end. I'll pass it now on to David for some final words. Thank you all so much for coming and for our panel, for such a great conversation that I think could go on for a couple more hours.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
David, back to you.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for that brilliant discussion and hitting upon so many perspectives from three different perspectives. The thing that stands out for me that just keeps hitting me as I'm listening is contemplation and action. That balance of contemplation and action that we so much need to follow Christ, to live Christ in the world, to bring Christ to others. And it just seems like the three of you have found it by combining this active Catholic worker life with the structure of Benedictine spirituality and the rule. So thank you so much for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to go to a slide of next week's presentation, our third and final event. And it is going to be next Saturday, the 19th. And it's going to be a panel discussion with the leaders of the canonization cause. We'll have George Horton, who has been there right from the beginning when Cardinal O'Connor first started, out of curiosity, kind of wondering if he should pursue, opening the cause. And he called a bunch of people, a couple meetings in the 90s. George was there, and George has always been working on it, he's been the stable force through this whole process in the last 20 some years. And so George is going to be there to talk about all what happened during the diocesan inquiry. And then we'll also be joined by Emanuele, let's see if I can pronounce his last name, Spedicato.
Yeah, you got it.
He is working with, he's working in Rome with the cause, along with the postulator Waldry Hegelman. So he's directly involved now with the future steps, with the beatification process. Well, I should say, let me back up, with bringing it to the veneration, the venerable stage, and then the beatification and then canonization. And he'll have a lot to say. But anyways, lots of time for questions. I think this will be the first time there's a forum, a public forum, to really look deeply at the process that we've been through and we're undergoing, and we'll be continuing. So that's going to be really fascinating. So come on back next week. I'll be sending out reminders to all the registrants. And now I'd like to just a couple of minutes on the Dorothy Day Canonization Prayer Network. I'm going to share my screen, and be patient with me. This is the first time I ever shared a screen on a Zoom, so we'll see how this comes out. Okay, so we have it, our web address is the Dorothy Day, or dorothydayasaint.org or .info will get you to the same website. The first page talks a little bit about our organization, why canonize Dorothy Day, who we are, who the founders were, and how to participate in our prayer calendar, which is the next page. So our prayer calendar, we have groups that are committing to 1 day a month of praying for the cause, and at this point, praying for those who are asking for Dorothy's intercession. So you can see all the groups. Now, if you go, let's see, today is the 12th. So we have the Bristol, Virginia Oblates of St. Benedict Monastery, Bedford, Virginia Oblates, again, of St. Benedict Monastery, Pax Christi of Southwestern South Dakota, the Dorothy Day Guild in New York, Oblates of St. Martin Monastery in Rapid City, South Dakota, and Oblates of St. Walburg Monastery in Villa Hills, Kentucky. So that's one of our busiest days there, but as you can see, there are groups of every day of the month. So that recurs every month. The third page is on prayer requests. So people can send in prayer requests to our page, and we post them here. So we have about almost 300 intercessions or requests for prayer here. And if you scroll all the way to the very bottom, you get right to the submission. You can submit a prayer request there, fill out your first and last name, your email address, and what you would like your intention, how you would like that posted. So then all the prayer groups on the previous page will be praying for those intercessions. And then finally, we have a page for Benedictines and Oblates. The top part of it, of course, is this 3-session series, how to register for it. We will post the recordings of all 3 sessions on this page when it's finished after next week. And then there's different resources. You'll be able to see the oblation of Dorothy Day at St. Procopius Abbey. Rosalie Riegel has a great presentation down here that was published in their cholesterol publication. So those are the 4 pages of our website. So if I should have gone a little further down on the prayer calendar page because it has a listing of all the groups. And so for all you Benedictine Oblates out there, you can look and see if your chapter is listed. And if it isn't, you can talk to your director and talk to the other members of your chapter if maybe you want to pick out a day a month to pray for those asking for Dorothy's intercession. So that's a brief description of the Dorothy Day Canonization Prayer Network. And we started it back in 2010. And we are hoping to play a major role in finding those 2 miracles that are needed for Dorothy's canonization. So once again, thank you so much for joining. We look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Carmina. Thank you, Rosalie. Thank you, Liza, for your participation and making this such an interesting discussion. Goodbye and God bless everyone.